Welcome to The Midnight Secrets. The Phantom Guest. In the summer of 2006, Mark Hastings, a seasoned traveler and history enthusiast, embarked on a trip to New Orleans. He had visited the city several times before, drawn to its rich history, vibrant culture, and hauntingly beautiful architecture. This time, he decided to stay in a hotel with a reputation as old as the city itself. The Maison de Lafayette, a once grand establishment, had survived the ravages of time, including the Civil War and the devastating yellow fever epidemics that had claimed the lives of so many. The hotel, now slightly faded but still elegant, was a perfect place for Mark to immerse himself in the city's past. When Mark arrived at the hotel, he was immediately struck by its atmosphere. The high ceilings, ornate chandeliers, and worn yet luxurious carpets spoke of a bygone era. The walls were adorned with portraits of stern-looking men in Confederate uniforms and delicate Southern belles, their eyes seeming to follow guests as they walked by. Mark, intrigued by the hotel's history, asked the receptionist for a room on the third floor, which he had read was the most historically preserved part of the hotel. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a warm but tired smile, handed him the key to room 318. She mentioned that it was one of their most requested rooms, though she didn't elaborate on why. Mark, excited by the prospect of staying in such a historic room, thanked her and made his way upstairs. Room 318 was everything Mark had hoped for. The room was spacious, with a large four-poster bed draped in heavy velvet curtains. The furniture was antique, the kind that looked as though it had been there since the hotel first opened its doors. Mark noticed a framed photograph on the wall, depicting a young soldier in a Confederate uniform, his expression serious and determined. The caption underneath read, "Lieutenant James Beauregard, 1863. After unpacking, Mark spent the day exploring New Orleans, visiting the French Quarter, and enjoying the local cuisine. He returned to the hotel late in the evening, tired but content. As he prepared for bed, he noticed how quiet the hotel was. The usual sounds of a busy hotel, footsteps in the hallways, voices from adjacent rooms, were absent. The only noise was the occasional creak of the floorboards, which added to the room's eerie ambience. Around midnight, just as Mark was drifting off to sleep, he heard a faint knock on the door. It was so soft that at first, he thought he had imagined it. But then the knock came again, this time louder. Mark got out of bed and walked to the door, expecting to find another guest or perhaps a member of the hotel staff. But when he opened the door, the hallway was empty. The long corridor stretched out in both directions, dimly lit by sconces that cast flickering shadows on the walls. Mark stepped out into the hallway and looked around, but there was no one in sight. Confused, he returned to his room and locked the door. He tried to shrug off the incident as a prank or perhaps a guest who had knocked on the wrong door. He climbed back into bed, but sleep didn't come easily. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the old building settling. Just as he was finally drifting off again, he heard it, a soft, almost inaudible whisper. The sound was so faint that at first, Mark thought it was the wind. But as he listened closer, he realized the whisper was coming from inside the room. Mark's heart began to race. He sat up in bed, straining to hear the words, but they were too faint to make out. The whispering continued, growing louder until it seemed to be coming from right beside him. Mark looked around the room, his eyes darting from the door to the window, but there was no one there. The air in the room had grown noticeably colder, and Mark felt a chill run down his spine. He jumped out of bed and turned on all the lights, hoping to banish whatever presence was in the room. The whispering stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only the deafening silence in its wake. Mark spent the rest of the night wide awake, his nerves on edge, waiting for the whispering to return. But it never did. The next morning, Mark went downstairs for breakfast, feeling exhausted and shaken. He mentioned the strange noises to the receptionist, hoping for some explanation. The woman listened carefully, her expression unreadable. When Mark finished his story, she smiled slightly, as if she had heard it all before. "Room 318 has a bit of history," she said, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "During the Civil War, the hotel was used as a hospital for Confederate soldiers. Lieutenant James Beauregard, the man in the photograph, was one of them. He was a young officer who contracted yellow fever and died in that very room." Mark felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The receptionist continued, "Over the years, many guests have reported strange occurrences in room 318, knocking on the door, whispering, cold spots. Some even claim to have seen the ghost of Lieutenant Beauregard wandering the halls." Mark, now thoroughly unnerved, asked to be moved to another room for the remainder of his stay. The receptionist obliged, but she left him with a parting thought. "Ghosts don't haunt the living," she said softly. "They haunt the places they can't leave." Mark spent the rest of his stay in the hotel without further incident, but the experience stayed with him long after he returned home. He couldn't shake the feeling that, in room 318, he had come face to face with something beyond the realm of the living, a glimpse into a past that refused to stay buried. The disappearing maid. In the autumn of 2013, Sarah and David Peterson, a young couple from Denver, decided to take a much-needed weekend getaway to escape the stress of their busy lives. They chose a remote mountain lodge in Colorado, nestled high in the Rockies, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. The lodge, known as the Timberline Retreat, was a charming, rustic inn that promised tranquility and breathtaking views of the surrounding wilderness. The drive up to the lodge was long and winding, with the road gradually narrowing as it climbed higher into the mountains. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the peaks. The lodge itself was a large, wooden structure, built in the early 1900s, with a wraparound porch and a stone fireplace that dominated the lobby. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, with the smell of burning wood and pine in the air. As they entered the lodge, they were greeted by the manager, an elderly woman named Margaret. She was kind and welcoming, her eyes twinkling with the wisdom of someone who had seen countless guests come and go over the years. Margaret handed them the key to their room, a cozy suite on the second floor with a view of the mountains. After settling in, Sarah and David decided to explore the lodge. The interior was just as charming as the exterior, with wooden beams, vintage furniture, and old photographs of the lodge's early days lining the walls. As they wandered through the hallways, they came across a maid cleaning one of the rooms. She was in her mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back into a bun, and wore a traditional maid's uniform, complete with a white apron. She was dusting the furniture meticulously, her movements slow and deliberate. Sarah and David smiled at her as they passed, and she returned the gesture with a polite but somewhat sad smile. There was something about her demeanor that struck Sarah as odd, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. The couple continued on their way, exploring the lodge's amenities, including a small library and a cozy lounge with a roaring fire. Later that evening, they returned to their room, looking forward to a peaceful night's sleep. The mountain air was crisp and cold, and they left the window slightly open to let in the fresh breeze. As they lay in bed, they listened to the sounds of the forest outside, the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. It was a stark contrast to the noise of the city, and they both fell asleep quickly. The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling refreshed and rejuvenated. As they packed their bags, she commented on how clean the room was, even though they hadn't seen anyone enter since they arrived. David agreed, noting that the lodge seemed to be well maintained despite its age. When they went downstairs to check out, Sarah mentioned the maid they had seen the previous day to Margaret, complimenting her on the staff's diligence. Margaret's reaction was unexpected. Her cheerful expression faltered, and she looked at Sarah with a mixture of surprise and concern. "We don't have any cleaning staff," Margaret said slowly. "I run the lodge on my own, and I haven't hired anyone in years." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She quickly described the maid they had seen, thinking there must be some mistake. But as she spoke, Margaret's face grew even more serious. Margaret sighed and motioned for them to sit down. "What you saw was not one of my staff," she began. "Many years ago, there was a maid who worked here. Her name was Clara. She was a quiet woman, very dedicated to her work. One winter, while the lodge was closed for the season, Clara stayed behind to take care of the place. One night, during a snowstorm, she slipped on the stairs while carrying a heavy load of linens. She fell and hit her head. By the time anyone found her, it was too late." Sarah and David listened in stunned silence as Margaret continued. "Since then, there have been reports of guests seeing a maid in the lodge, usually cleaning or dusting. It's always the same description, a woman in her 40s, with dark hair and a sad expression. Some say she doesn't know she's dead, that she's still trying to do her job, even in the afterlife." The couple sat there, processing what they had just heard. The maid they had seen, the one who had smiled at them, was not alive. She was a ghost, forever bound to the lodge, repeating the tasks she had done in life. Shaken, Sarah and David quickly finished checking out and left the lodge. The peaceful, relaxing weekend they had envisioned had turned into something far more unsettling. As they drove down the mountain road, the lodge growing smaller in the rearview mirror, they couldn't help but glance back, half expecting to see the figure of the maid standing in one of the windows, still dusting, still trapped in her endless routine. The Locked Room Mystery. In the spring of 2017, a group of 5 college friends, Lisa, Emily, Tom, Mike, and Jessica, decided to spend their spring break in Savannah, Georgia, a city known for its southern charm, historic architecture, and, as they would soon discover, its ghostly legends. They chose to stay at the Hawthorne Hotel, a grand old building located in the heart of the historic district. The hotel had been in operation since the 1800s and was known for its elegant decor and luxurious accommodations. The group arrived at the hotel on a warm, sunny afternoon, eager to start their vacation. The lobby of the Hawthorne Hotel was breathtaking, with its high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and polished marble floors. The front desk was staffed by a friendly young man named Daniel, who checked them in and handed them the keys to their rooms on the 3rd floor. The friends had booked 2 adjacent rooms, one for the girls and one for the guys, hoping to stay close together and enjoy their time in Savannah. After settling into their rooms, the group set out to explore the city. They spent the day touring historic sites, visiting local shops, and indulging in Savannah's famous cuisine. By the time they returned to the hotel that evening, they were tired but happy, ready to relax and unwind. The night was still young, and the group decided to continue their fun in the guys' room. They ordered some drinks from room service, played cards, and talked late into the night. Around midnight, Lisa, who had been feeling under the weather, decided to call it a night and return to the girls' room to get some rest. The others stayed up a while longer, enjoying the night and planning their activities for the next day. An hour or so later, Emily suggested they check on Lisa to see if she needed anything before they all went to bed. The group agreed and walked over to the girls' room. They knocked on the door, but there was no response. Thinking Lisa might have fallen asleep, Emily used the spare key to unlock the door. As they entered the room, they immediately noticed something was wrong. The room was unnaturally cold, and a heavy, oppressive feeling seemed to hang in the air. The bed was perfectly made, except for a single indentation where Lisa was lying, completely still. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling, and her skin was as pale as the sheets she lay on. Emily rushed to Lisa's side, calling her name and shaking her gently, but Lisa didn't respond. She was breathing, but her breaths were shallow and labored, as if she were in a deep trance. Panic set in as the group realized something was terribly wrong. Tom quickly called the front desk, and within minutes, hotel staff arrived, followed by paramedics. The paramedics examined Lisa but found nothing physically wrong with her. She was unresponsive, and her vital signs were stable but weak. Unable to explain her condition, they decided to transport her to the hospital for further evaluation. The friends followed closely behind, their minds racing with fear and confusion. At the hospital, doctors ran a battery of tests, but everything came back normal. There was no sign of illness, injury, or any medical condition that could explain Lisa's state. She remained unconscious for the rest of the night, and it wasn't until late the next morning that she finally woke up. When Lisa opened her eyes, she was disoriented and confused. She had no memory of what had happened after she went to bed the previous night. The last thing she recalled was lying down and feeling a sudden, overwhelming pressure on her chest, as if something was crushing her. She tried to scream, but no sound came out, and she found herself unable to move. It was as if an invisible force was holding her down, paralyzing her. The next thing she knew, she was waking up in the hospital. The doctors, unable to find a medical explanation for Lisa's experience, eventually discharged her with a clean bill of health. But the friends were left with more questions than answers. Determined to find out what had happened, they returned to the hotel and asked to speak with the manager. The manager, a middle-aged man named Mr. Harrison, listened to their story with a grave expression. When they finished, he hesitated before speaking. "I'm afraid you've encountered something that has been reported by several guests over the years," he said slowly. "Room 302, where Lisa was staying, has a dark history." Mr. Harrison explained that many decades ago, a woman named Catherine had stayed in room 302. She was a young bride, honeymooning with her husband. But the honeymoon ended in tragedy when Catherine was found dead in the room, her face frozen in an expression of terror. The official cause of death was ruled as heart failure, but rumors quickly spread that something more sinister had occurred. Since then, guests who stayed in room 302 often reported feeling a heavy pressure on their chest while sleeping, as if something was trying to suffocate them. Some even described seeing a shadowy figure standing at the foot of the bed, watching them with cold, malevolent eyes. The hotel, aware of the room's reputation, usually avoided renting it out, but occasionally, guests would request it, drawn by the stories of its haunted past. Hearing this, Lisa and her friends were horrified. They had never believed in ghosts or the supernatural, but what had happened to Lisa was too real to dismiss. They immediately checked out of the hotel, unable to spend another night in a place that now felt more like a horror movie than a vacation spot. As they left Savannah and drove back to their university, the group was quiet, each lost in their thoughts. Lisa, still shaken by her experience, couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if her friends hadn't come to check on her. Would she have woken up at all? The question lingered in her mind, a dark cloud that would haunt her long after they returned to their normal lives.